There is a quiet withdrawal that doesn't look like loneliness. Messages go unanswered a little longer. Invitations are declined without drama. Time alone increases, not out of sadness, but out of relief. Being by oneself feels calmer, safer, easier to manage. Isolation becomes less a reaction and more a preference, a place where nothing unexpected can happen. People who isolate to protect themselves rarely see it as avoidance. They describe it as needing space, conserving energy, or maintaining peace. Social contact isn't rejected outright, it's simply rationed. Too much interaction feels invasive. Too much closeness feels demanding. Solitude offers control, no explanations required, no adjustments needed. In everyday life, this shows up subtly. Enjoying plans being canceled, feeling tension before social commitments, relaxing only after returning home. The outside world isn't feared, it's just experienced as heavy. Alone, the nervous system settles, the mind stops scanning, the body finally exhales. Because this isolation brings immediate relief, it reinforces itself. The absence of stimulation feels like safety. Distance feels like balance. Over time, being alone becomes the default state, not because connection isn't wanted, but because it feels unpredictable. Isolation turns into a buffer, a way to keep life manageable. And slowly, a quiet question forms beneath the comfort. Is this peace, or is it protection that has gone unnoticed? This protective isolation is rarely rooted in disinterest in people. More often, it comes from sensitivity. Social environments require adjustment, reading cues, managing emotions, responding to expectations. For some, this constant calibration becomes exhausting, not overwhelming, but draining. Being alone removes the need to manage anything beyond the self. From a psychological perspective, isolation can function as regulation. When the nervous system has learned that interaction carries emotional cost, distance becomes a tool for stability. Solitude offers predictability. Nothing unexpected is demanded. The system can relax into its own rhythm without interruption. Behaviorally, this creates a pattern of selective engagement. Contact is maintained, but on narrow terms. Short interactions, familiar people, controlled environments. The person isn't detached, they are careful. Connection is approached like something that must be paced, not immersed in. Over time, this reinforces a subtle belief. Closeness equals strain, distance equals safety. The body responds to social exposure with alertness, and to solitude with relief. This conditioning happens quietly. The person doesn't decide to isolate. The system learns where it feels least taxed and stays there. There is a moment when this pattern becomes clear. It usually appears after a stretch of distance. Time alone feels steady, calm, manageable. Then contact resumes. A conversation, a meeting, a request, and something tightens. Not fear, not rejection.
Just a subtle internal bracing. The system prepares, attention sharpens, energy is allocated before anything actually happens. From a behavioral perspective, this reaction is learned. If past interactions required emotional labor, explaining oneself, managing others' moods, adapting constantly, the body remembers. It anticipates cost before the mind names it. Isolation isn't chosen because people are unwanted, but because the system expects depletion. Psychologically, this creates an internal filter. Invitations are evaluated not by desire, but by predicted effort. How long will this last? How much adjustment will it require? Will there be expectations afterward? Even neutral interactions are scanned for potential drain. Saying no becomes easier than negotiating presence. Over time, this leads to a narrowing of experience. Fewer surprises, fewer conflicts, fewer demands. Life becomes quieter, but also smaller. The protection works, the nervous system stays regulated, yet something subtle is traded away. Connection remains possible, but it must pass through layers of caution before it's allowed in. As this pattern stabilizes, it begins to shape emotional expectations. The person learns to anticipate relief from distance and tension from closeness. Social calm is no longer associated with connection, but with absence. Being alone feels neutral, even restorative. Being with others feels like something to manage. This inversion happens quietly, without conscious choice. From a psychological perspective, protection becomes preference when it works too well. The nervous system rewards isolation with immediate regulation. Heart rate steadies, thoughts slow. There is less need to interpret, respond, or adapt. Over time, this relief conditions behavior. Distance isn't just safer, it becomes familiar. Familiarity turns into comfort. Emotionally, this creates a muted range in relationships. Care exists but is contained. Affection is felt but expressed selectively. Vulnerability is delayed. The person remains kind and responsive, yet internally guarded. Not because trust is impossible, but because openness feels costly. Nothing dramatic breaks. There is no obvious loneliness. The person can function socially when needed, but the internal signal is clear. Less contact equals more stability.
And when stability is prioritized above all else, connection slowly becomes optional, something approached carefully rather than lived freely. Over time, this protective distance begins to influence how identity is experienced. The person may start to see themselves as independent, self-contained, or low maintenance. These traits feel accurate. They explain the comfort with solitude. They justify the boundaries, and they help frame isolation as strength rather than retreat. Psychologically, however, identity shaped around protection often hides a quiet tension. The system learns to rely on withdrawal for regulation.
When difficulty arises, the solution is distance. When discomfort appears, space is created. This works, but it limits the system's capacity to stay present through relational complexity. Behaviorally, this shows up as quick exits, pulling back when emotions deepen, reducing contact when expectations increase, keeping conversations light to avoid emotional demand. The person isn't rejecting others, they are minimizing exposure. Connection is allowed, but only where it feels predictable. Over time, this narrows emotional range. Relationships exist, but rarely stretch. Intimacy is approached carefully, sometimes hesitantly. The protection remains effective, but the cost becomes clearer. Fewer moments of deep resonance, fewer experiences of being fully met. The question slowly shifts from how do I stay safe to what am I giving up to feel this safe? The most important shift happens when isolation is no longer seen as personality, but as a strategy. Not a flaw, not avoidance, a learned way of staying regulated. The system discovered that distance reduces demand, and it held on to that solution. Over time, protection quietly became the default. When this is recognized, isolation takes on new meaning. It's no longer simply comfort, it's information. A signal of where interaction begins to feel unsafe, unpredictable, or emotionally taxing. Understanding this doesn't demand immediate closeness. It invites awareness instead of withdrawal. Psychologically, connection isn't lost because distance exists. It's lost when distance replaces all forms of engagement. Safety becomes so prioritized that expansion feels threatening. Yet safety and connection are not opposites. They are interdependent. One allows the other to exist. There is no instruction here to force intimacy or abandon solitude. The shift begins with noticing when withdrawal is chosen automatically, when space is created before need is confirmed, when relief arrives too quickly. These moments reveal how deeply protection has been wired. It may be worth observing what closeness threatens in those moments, what feels at risk, what the system expects to lose. In many cases, isolation isn't about rejecting people. It's about guarding something fragile that never learned how to stay safe in connection. Here, these patterns are observed calmly.